The phone rang for the first time at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I looked at the screen, saw the name, and let it keep ringing until it stopped. Outside my bedroom window, the snow was coming down so hard that the street signs had almost disappeared beneath the drifts. The wind slammed against the house with a roar that sounded more like a passing freight train than a winter storm. Every weather report I'd checked before going to bed had warned the same thing. This wasn't just another snowy night. It was being called the biggest blizzard our county had seen in nearly 10 years. Only a couple of minutes passed before my phone lit up again. This time the caller wasn't just another member of the Homeowners Association. It was the HOA president himself, the same man who had stood confidently in front of dozens of homeowners only 3 weeks earlier and proudly explained why my company's snow removal contract had been canceled. According to him, they were making smarter financial decisions and trimming unnecessary expenses. Now his voicemail sounded nothing like the speech he'd given at that meeting. His voice was shaky. "Please call me back, it's an emergency." Before I even finished listening, another call came through. That's when something clicked. Nobody else was answering. And the only snowplow company with equipment already staged within 30 miles was mine. By 2:30 that morning, the same neighborhood that had decided it could save money without me was completely trapped beneath the storm. What happened after that changed everything. I've lived in Briar Ridge Estates for 11 years. It's one of those neighborhoods that looks almost identical from one street to the next. Matching mailboxes, identical fences, carefully maintained lawns through the summer, and homes that all seem to follow the same handful of designs. It's a quiet suburban community in the Midwest where people take pride in keeping everything looking perfect. But winter doesn't care how expensive your house is. Around here, lake effect snow can arrive without much warning. Whiteout conditions aren't unusual, and when a major storm rolls in, it doesn't matter whether you drive a luxury SUV or an old pickup. If the roads aren't cleared, nobody is going anywhere. For the previous 6 winters, my company handled every bit of snow removal for the HOA. We cleared neighborhood streets. We opened driveways. We kept sidewalks safe. We maintained the clubhouse parking lot before residents even woke up. Most people barely noticed us, and honestly, that was usually the best compliment we could receive. If homeowners weren't thinking about snow removal, it meant we'd already done our job before it became their problem. We took preparation seriously. Our trucks were serviced long before winter started. We kept extra cutting blades ready in case one failed during a storm. We stored emergency fuel. We maintained backup salt supplies. When forecasts called for overnight snowfall, my crew wasn't scrambling after sunrise. We were already warming up engines while most people were still asleep. The contract itself wasn't making anyone rich. It wasn't the biggest account we had. But dependable work keeps small businesses alive, especially during the winter months. Predictable income allows you to keep experienced employees, maintain equipment, and stay ready when the next storm arrives. Everything stayed that way until spring, when a completely new HOA board was elected. There was a new president, a new treasurer, a new group promising fresh ideas. Almost immediately, every conversation became focused on one thing: saving money. The first warning showed up in September. An email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Winter Budget Restructuring Proposal." I opened the attached document expecting routine adjustments. Instead, I found a comparison chart showing my contract beside another company's bid that came in almost 30% cheaper. At first glance, the numbers looked impressive. But numbers rarely tell the entire story. The company they wanted to hire wasn't local. They operated 2 counties away. They had no equipment stored anywhere near our neighborhood. There wasn't a nearby salt depot. They didn't have overnight crews already standing by during storms. Their lower price existed because they weren't providing the same level of readiness. On paper, they looked like a bargain. In reality, they were gambling that severe weather wouldn't expose the difference. I requested a meeting with the board before they made their decision. When October arrived, I attended the HOA meeting and calmly walked everyone through the details they were overlooking. That extra 30% wasn't simply profit. It covered around-the-clock availability. It covered pre-treating roads before freezing rain. It guaranteed that once snowfall reached the agreed trigger depth, trucks would already be moving. It meant dedicated equipment assigned specifically to Briar Ridge instead of being shared across multiple towns. I explained every point without raising my voice. When I finished, the new HOA president smiled politely. Then he said something I never forgot. "We appreciate everything you've done for the neighborhood, but homeowners deserve better savings." Those words hung in the room. Savings. As if reliability had somehow become optional. The vote happened only minutes later. Every board member supported canceling my contract. The agreement officially ended on November 30. 6 years of dependable service disappeared with one unanimous decision. I packed up the equipment I had staged near the subdivision and reassigned my crews to other contracts. Shopping centers, medical offices, industrial properties, and a few nearby residential communities still depended on us, so there wasn't much time to dwell on losing one account. Business moved forward, and so did we. At least that's what I believed. The first part of winter was uneventful. December came and went with only a few light snowfalls, nothing that challenged any contractor. January wasn't much different. Every storm was manageable, and from what I could see while driving through town, the new company was getting by well enough. One afternoon, after a storm that dropped only a few inches of snow, I happened to pass through Briar Ridge. The roads weren't terrible, but they weren't what I'd call clean either. Snow had already been packed into tire ruts. Salt coverage looked inconsistent. Several sidewalks still had patches that should have been cleared hours earlier. I noticed it. Then I kept driving. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. February arrived with a different tone. Weather alerts started showing up several days in advance. The National Weather Service wasn't using its usual language. Meteorologists were warning about a powerful winter system capable of producing blizzard conditions across the region. Forecasts predicted between 18 and 24 inches of snow. Wind gusts approaching 50 miles an hour. Near-zero visibility. The kind of weather that turns familiar streets into frozen mazes. Storms like that don't forgive shortcuts. They're the ones that reveal the difference between companies that prepare year-round and companies that simply hope for mild winters. About 3 days before the blizzard was expected to arrive, another property manager called me while we were discussing one of our commercial sites. During the conversation, he mentioned something interesting. The contractor hired by Briar Ridge had taken on far more work than they could realistically handle. Apparently, they had only 4 plow trucks assigned across 3 different counties. Every neighborhood believed it would receive priority service. Obviously, that wasn't possible. Someone would be left waiting. Maybe several communities would. I listened. Then I thanked him for the information. I still didn't contact the HOA. There wasn't any reason to. Their decision had already been made months earlier. The snow began falling shortly before 9 that evening. At first it looked manageable. Large flakes drifted quietly under the streetlights. Within only a couple of hours, everything changed. The wind strengthened. Visibility disappeared. Snow started piling up faster than anyone expected. By midnight, accumulation had already passed 10 inches. Huge drifts rolled across open roads like waves crashing onto a beach. Every forecast had been accurate. This storm wasn't slowing down. At 1:15 that morning, one of my commercial clients called just to confirm our crews were already mobilizing. Our drivers had been preparing for hours. By 1:45, every truck was on the road. One crew headed toward a medical clinic. Another cleared shopping centers. A third focused on retirement communities where emergency access couldn't be delayed. Every minute mattered. Our schedule was packed. Then my phone lit up. 2:17 a.m. The caller ID showed the HOA president. I looked at it for a second. Then I let it ring. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I was angry. I already knew why he was calling. If he needed me during the worst storm of the decade, it meant their new contractor wasn't there. About 40 minutes later, social media started filling with posts from Briar Ridge residents. People uploaded photos of buried streets. Neighbors asked if anyone had seen a snowplow. Someone wrote they couldn't even back out of their driveway. Another resident said an elderly relative needed medication but no vehicle could make it through the neighborhood. The comments multiplied every few minutes. Around 3:12, I received a text from someone I'd remained friends with after losing the contract. They still haven't shown up. Nobody can leave. The roads are completely blocked. I replied with only one message. Stay inside if you can. By sunrise, official snowfall totals reached 22 inches. In several locations, wind-driven drifts stood nearly chest-high. Emergency vehicles struggled to enter certain cul-de-sacs. Some roads had become impossible to identify beneath the snow. That's when another voicemail arrived. This one sounded completely different from the first. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the certainty. His voice carried genuine panic. This is serious. We need immediate service. Tell us your price. There it was. No debate. No discussion about budgets. No presentation comparing bids. Just urgency. People often imagine revenge as something dramatic. But sometimes the most effective response isn't emotional at all. Sometimes it's simply honoring the agreement everyone signed. I opened the copy of the contract they had canceled. Buried inside was a clause that almost nobody had ever paid attention to. Emergency reinstatement during severe weather. If the HOA requested service after canceling the seasonal agreement, several conditions automatically applied. The full seasonal payment became due immediately. An emergency surcharge of 40% was added. Completion times were not guaranteed because existing contracted customers always came first. Those terms weren't hidden. The board itself had approved them years earlier. They simply never expected to need them. At 7:30 that morning, after our crews had already completed several priority locations, I finally returned the call. I stayed calm, professional, respectful. I explained that we were fully committed to servicing customers who had honored their contracts before the storm arrived. If Briar Ridge wanted emergency reinstatement, we could certainly help. But the contract outlined exactly how that process worked. The total came to $48,000. Payment would need to be received immediately before we could add the neighborhood to our schedule. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Finally he spoke. That's more than we paid for the entire season. Yes, I answered, because the seasonal agreement was canceled. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply explained the contract they had chosen to terminate. The board didn't have many options. Their contractor was nowhere close. Roads inside the neighborhood had become completely impassable. Residents were calling one another, posting online, and demanding answers. Every hour the situation became more serious. Eventually they agreed. The wire transfer arrived before we redirected a single truck. Even after payment cleared, we didn't immediately head toward Briar Ridge. That wasn't punishment. It was responsibility. Every client who had trusted us before the storm deserved to receive the service they had already paid for. Hospitals, retirement communities, shopping centers, and businesses relying on us couldn't simply be abandoned because another customer suddenly found themselves in trouble. That's exactly what contracts are supposed to accomplish. They establish priorities before emergencies happen. Throughout the morning, my dispatch team stayed focused on our regular routes. Drivers checked in by radio every few minutes. Fuel levels, equipment conditions, road closures, changing weather. The wind continued pushing fresh snow back across areas we'd already cleared. It was one of those storms where finishing a route didn't necessarily mean it stayed open for very long. By early afternoon, we had completed our highest priority locations. Only then did I give the order. 3 plow trucks, 2 salt spreaders, a loader. The convoy headed toward Briar Ridge. As we approached the subdivision entrance, the difference was impossible to ignore. Cars sat stranded halfway down driveways. Mailboxes were buried. Snowbanks stretched across intersections that normally handled steady traffic. Residents stood outside wearing heavy winter coats, watching our equipment arrive. Some held up phones and recorded everything. Others simply folded their arms and shook their heads. Nobody looked relieved. Most looked frustrated. Not at us. At the situation that never should have happened. We began clearing the main entrance first. Without access from the primary road, nothing else mattered. Truck after truck pushed through drifts that had hardened under constant wind. The snow was far heavier than normal because each pass collected fresh accumulation almost immediately. Progress wasn't fast, but it was steady. As we worked farther into the neighborhood, word spread quickly. People stepped onto porches. Garage doors opened. Neighbors gathered in small groups despite the freezing temperatures. Everyone seemed to be talking about the same thing. The HOA had replaced a reliable local contractor with a cheaper company. Now they had spent far more bringing the original crew back during an emergency. No amount of explaining could change what everyone was seeing with their own eyes. By the weekend, the board scheduled an emergency homeowners meeting. Attendance was unlike anything they'd experienced before. Normally, only a handful of residents showed up. This time the room filled long before the meeting started. People wanted answers. Why had the contract been changed just before winter? Why was the lowest bid accepted without considering emergency response? Did anyone verify where the new contractor stored equipment? Was there any backup plan if multiple communities needed service at once? Question after question came from every corner of the room. The board tried to defend its decision. They talked about reducing expenses. They discussed fiscal responsibility. They pointed to spreadsheets showing projected savings. But numbers lose their persuasive power when residents have already spent days trapped inside their own homes. Several families had missed work. Medical appointments had been canceled. Delivery vehicles couldn't enter the neighborhood. Parents worried about school closures and emergency access. The theoretical savings no longer felt meaningful. Within 2 weeks, homeowners organized a formal vote expressing no confidence in the HOA president. Support for the existing leadership collapsed quickly. By the time spring arrived, he stepped down from his position. Several other board members chose not to run for re-election. A completely different leadership team eventually took over. Life moved on. Winter ended. Our company continued serving the customers who had remained loyal from the beginning. Months passed without another conversation about Briar Ridge. Then autumn arrived again. One afternoon my office received a phone call. The new HOA board wanted to schedule a meeting. I accepted. When we sat down together, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the previous year. Nobody asked for discounts. Nobody tried comparing bids from companies hundreds of miles away. Instead, they talked about consistency, preparedness, reliability. They admitted the previous winter had revealed weaknesses they hadn't considered during the budgeting process. Price mattered, but dependable service mattered even more. After several meetings, we signed a new agreement. This one covered 3 years instead of a single season. The annual rate was slightly higher than our previous contract, reflecting increased operating costs and expanded readiness requirements. There was also one important addition. Any future decision to terminate the agreement before winter would require formal board review and additional homeowner oversight. Interestingly, that protection wasn't my idea. The homeowners insisted on including it. They wanted to make sure no future board could quietly replace dependable service with the cheapest proposal without careful discussion. Experience had changed their perspective. People often underestimate reliability because it's invisible when everything works. When roads are already clear before sunrise, nobody thinks about the planning that made it happen. When emergency supplies are stocked months in advance, nobody notices. When equipment is maintained throughout the year instead of repaired after it breaks, it rarely gets attention. Preparation is easy to overlook because its success looks ordinary. Its absence, however, becomes impossible to ignore. Looking back, I never celebrated what happened during that storm. I didn't enjoy hearing the panic in those phone calls. I never mocked the board after they realized their mistake. Nature doesn't care about pride. Blizzards don't punish bad decisions out of spite. They simply expose them. The real lesson was never about getting even. It was about understanding what you're actually paying for when you hire professionals. The lowest price isn't automatically the best value. Sometimes a higher bid includes experience, planning, equipment, local knowledge, and people willing to answer the phone long before sunrise. Those things rarely appear as separate numbers on a spreadsheet. But they're incredibly valuable when conditions become dangerous. Trying to save money by removing experience can end up costing far more than anyone expected. If you've ever watched an organization cut corners believing nothing would go wrong, you've probably seen a similar story unfold. Eventually, every season changes. Challenges always arrive. And when they do, preparation almost always proves more valuable than short-term savings.